We're going to take a closer look now at some European politics after the far-right Sweden Democrats increased their share in Parliament and promised to make their presence felt, notably on the issue of migration. After thousands took to the streets in East Germany chanting neo-Nazi slogans, and as asylum seekers continue to be refused entry to the EU and the focus of political parties look to be turning increasingly inwards, is the far right on the rise across the EU? And if so, what's the real reason behind it? Well, joining us on set to give us his perspective is Mr. Jean-Yves Camus, a researcher at the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs. Mr. Camus, thanks so much for coming in to speak with us. Can I start just simply by asking you focused a lot of your study, all of it, in looking at that far right political parties, both here in France and the wider across the EU. Is it really on the rise? And if so, since when do you think that we've seen that change come about, and to what extent?
The far right is on the rise, and one example is that the Alternative für Deutschland entered the German parliament recently. But when it comes to Sweden, for example, the Swedish Democrats made a small gain this time and a very big gain in 2014. So it's not a new phenomenon. The Swedish Democrats polled, I think, 5% in the 1990s, and then rose to 12.5% in 2014. Now they've gained 4.5% in this election. So it's a slow rise. And they also rise, but do not get into powers, except in several countries like Austria. They do not have access to the cabinet, to government, because there's a broad coalition against any kind of alliances with such parties.
Yeah, there's often the vote against the far right, but there is a rise in their popularity nonetheless. Why do you think that is?
That's not only because of migration and the refugees. I think it's a wider move that opposes the proponents of the multicultural society and those who refuse it. It's not only about the people coming from the Near East or Afghanistan and settling into Sweden. It's the way people are unhappy with the fact that they feel their country is not safe anymore, on one side, and their country is not really their country. The cultural values seem to change so fast that part of the population, especially among the most deprived and the less educated, say, well, this is not my country anymore. Why is that? Because of immigration.
So to one extent, a lot of it is down to the economy and the fact that that idea of an EU identity hasn't yet taken hold. But when you look at Sweden, when you think economic reasons are to a large extent behind it, when you look at Sweden, economically, that's doing pretty well.
The economy is strong, but it seems that social inequalities are pretty much stronger than they used to be in a culture of equality. I mean, Scandinavia is about mostly not too many very rich people and not too many very poor people. No, they have an economy that is good, but they have poor people among the native population and a lot more very, very rich people. So it's kind of a breakaway from the previous tradition of equality among citizens.
And I guess people feeling discarded or disconnected with the political parties in power, is that what they need to address to turn things around?
They feel disconnected with the broader coalitions of, on the one side, the Conservatives and the Liberals, and on the other side, the Social Democrats and the Green Party. So they try to find another way. It's not only the extreme right Swedish Democrats that make gains in this election, also the radical left made quite a strong gain.
True. And now when you look at the EU level, we are seeing a lot of those various parties, both from the extreme right and the extreme left, gaining. We're heading into elections at that European Parliament next year in a couple of months' time. But when you look at that, because, as you say, in national politics, they don't perhaps get power because it's not a united enough front. But on the EU level, is that what we could see starting to form?
I don't think they will get a majority. But nevertheless, they've more or less achieved what they wanted, because the political agenda in most European countries has shifted very much to the right on issues of ethnicity, immigration, the refugees and so on, and the multicultural society. And most conservative parties and even most social democratic parties have been obliged to change their agenda and to, I would say, become more conservative on many issues.
Indeed. And, you know, the anti-Euro was for a long time the common cause of a lot of these more radical parties, but that seems to have been dropped.
That has been dropped because most of the younger voters have only known the euro. If you tell a French voter today who is between 20 and 30, let's go back to the former French currency, the franc, his question will be, what is that? So he would be afraid of opting out of the euro and going back to the old national currency.
Now, you mentioned earlier the alternative for Deutschland, the alternative for Germany, that far-right party that got seats in the Bundestag. But lately, more recently, we've seen these massive protests in the east of Germany. And we've also seen the announcement of the left-wing parties forming a united front, Aufstehen or Stand Up. What do you make of that as a reaction?
The Aufstehen movement is a radical left party. No, it's not yet a political party, by the way. And what they say is immigration is very positive for the big companies because it makes wages lower, and so immigration is a kind of pressure on the cost of labor. In a Marxist perspective, this is totally true. I mean, you might challenge it from a liberal point of view, but in the Marxist tradition, this is entirely true. And it appeals to this part of the German population who has I would say, seeing everything that the former East Germany stand for crumble at the time of unification. One should not assume that under the German Democratic Republic, everyone was anti-racist and prone to the multicultural society. Not at all.
That's true. I guess just because it's Germany, we have maybe a different image in our heads. But overall, do you think this rise of the far right and of radical parties is going to continue, or do you think that maybe politics have to focus more locally to try and change it?
I think that the mainstream conservative parties and the social democrats will still lose ground, and not only for gains on the extreme right, new parties will emerge, and we have an example with the Five-Star Movement in Italy. It might be the end of the old conservative right and the old social democratic left.
Okay, so perhaps, more choice on either side. A lot of them, as you mentioned there, have moved to the centre. Mr. Jean-Yves Camus, we're going to have to leave it at that. But thanks so much for giving us your analysis and insight on that situation across the EU. And I know you have a new book out this month, The Return of Populists, The State of the World in 2019, that came out on September 6th. And of course, looking ahead, I guess, at those EU elections. Mr. Jean-Yves Camus, thanks so much for your time.